I woke up to silence. Not the kind of silence you notice during a quiet afternoon, but a heavy, suffocating kind that presses down on you, like the air itself is holding its breath. My eyes were open, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, but my body wouldn't move. My chest felt pinned, like someone had dropped a concrete block on it, and my heart was thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. In the corner of the room, behind the old oak wardrobe that came with this place, something shifted. A shadow. Not just a trick of the streetlight filtering through my blinds, but something darker, denser, like it had weight. I wanted to scream, to bolt upright, to do anything, but my voice was trapped, my limbs locked. The shadow didn't move again, but I felt it watching me, waiting. My name's Daniel Rivera, and I'm 32, living in a creaky apartment in Erie, Pennsylvania, a city that's half forgotten its own history. I'm a graphic designer, mostly freelancing for a small marketing firm out of Pittsburgh, which means I spend my days hunched over a laptop in my living room, surrounded by half-empty coffee mugs and takeout containers. My place is on the third floor of an old brick building that used to house factory workers back when Erie was all about steel and shipping. Now it's just me, a few quiet neighbors, and the occasional hum of a barge on Lake Erie a mile away. That night, though, it wasn't the lake or the neighbors keeping me awake. It was that shadow, the same one that's been haunting my sleep paralysis episodes for years. This wasn't the first time. Sleep paralysis started when I was a teenager, maybe 15, back when I lived with my parents in a cramped house on the east side of town. But that night, in my apartment, with the shadow behind the wardrobe, felt different. It wasn't just fear. It was like the shadow knew something about me, something I'd buried so deep I didn't even know it myself. My bedroom was small, cluttered with stuff I hadn't bothered to unpack since moving in 2 years ago. A stack of graphic novels on the dresser, a thrift store lamp that flickered if you bumped it, a box of old sketchbooks under the bed. By day, it felt like home. At night, when the paralysis hit, it turned into a cage. I lay there, trying to focus on my breathing. In, out. In, out. It was the only thing I could control. My fingers wouldn't budge, my legs felt like they were sinking into the mattress, and my eyes were glued to that corner. The wardrobe loomed, its chipped wood catching the faint glow from the streetlight outside. The shadow behind it didn't move, but I could feel it, like a pressure in the room, like it was waiting for me to break. I've read about sleep paralysis, how it's just your brain waking up before your body, how the hallucinations are your mind playing tricks. But knowing that doesn't make it less real when you're stuck in it, when every instinct is screaming that you're not alone. I've always been a thinker, maybe too much. My mom used to say I'd worry myself into a corner, and she wasn't wrong. Growing up, I was the kid who'd lie awake wondering if I'd said the wrong thing at school or if my dad was mad at me for not helping with the yard. Now, at 32, I'm still that kid, just with a better laptop and a worse sleep schedule. That night, as I stared at the shadow, my mind started spiraling. Was it real? Was it me? Was it some part of my brain trying to tell me something I'd been ignoring? The room smelled faintly of the instant coffee I'd made earlier, cold now in a mug on the nightstand. Outside, a car hummed past, its headlights briefly slicing through the blinds. Normal sounds, normal smells, but they felt distant, like I was underwater. The first time I had sleep paralysis, I was 15, lying in my childhood bedroom with posters of Nirvana and Spider-Man peeling off the walls. I woke up, or thought I did, and couldn't move. Something was standing at the foot of my bed, tall and shapeless, like a smudge of ink. I tried to scream for my mom, but nothing came out. When it finally passed, I was soaked in sweat, my heart racing like I'd run a mile. I didn't tell anyone. How do you explain that your own body betrayed you, that you saw something that wasn't there? My dad would have said I was being dramatic, and my mom would have worried, maybe dragged me to church. So I kept it to myself, and it kept coming back. That night in my apartment, the shadow felt like an old friend, the kind you don't want to see but can't avoid. I've learned to cope with the paralysis over the years, focus on breathing, wiggle a toe, wait it out, but this time was heavier. I thought about my life, about how I ended up here, alone in a city that feels like it's stuck in 1985. Erie's not a bad place, just tired. The lake's beautiful when it's calm, but in winter, the wind off it cuts through you like a knife. My apartment's on Peach Street, a long stretch of faded storefronts and gas stations, and my windows rattle when the wind picks up. That night, they were still, but the silence was louder than any storm. I tried to think of something else, anything to pull me out of that moment. I thought about my mom, how she'd hum old Selena songs while cooking arroz con pollo in our tiny kitchen. She and my dad split when I was 18, and I haven't talked to him in years. The last time we spoke, he called me a dreamer, like it was an insult. Maybe he was right. I spend my days designing logos for companies I'll never visit, sketching ideas that half the time get rejected. It pays the rent, but it's not what I thought my life would be. The shadow behind the wardrobe felt like it knew that, like it was judging me for all the things I hadn't done. I don't know how long I lay there. Time gets weird in those moments. Seconds stretch into hours, and you're just stuck, floating in your own head. I started thinking about the wardrobe itself. It was here when I moved in, this hulking thing with carved details that looked like they belonged in a museum, not a one-bedroom apartment. I'd never opened it, never even thought about it much, but now it was all I could focus on. The shadow was behind it, or maybe inside it, or maybe it was the wardrobe. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought, the heavier I felt. Eventually, I managed to move a finger, then my hand. The paralysis broke, and I gasped, sitting up in bed, my t-shirt clinging to my back with sweat. The room was empty, the shadow gone, or maybe it was never there. The lamp on my nightstand buzzed faintly, its bulb flickering like it was about to die. I grabbed my phone, 3:17 a.m., the same time it always seemed to happen. I sat there, breathing hard, listening to the hum of the space heater in the corner. I wanted to get up, to check behind the wardrobe, but my legs felt like jelly. Instead, I just sat, staring at the corner, wondering if it would come back. I didn't sleep after that. I sat up in bed, my back against the headboard, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. The screen's blue light stung my eyes, but I kept scrolling through nothing. Old texts, random notifications, anything to keep my mind off that corner. The wardrobe stood there, silent, its dark wood soaking up the faint glow from the lamp. I kept glancing at it, half expecting the shadow to step out, to take shape, to say something. But it was just me, the hum of the space heater, and the distant rumble of a truck on Peach Street. I've never been good at shaking things off. My mom used to say I hold on to things too tightly. Grudges, worries, memories. She'd laugh and say I'd make myself old before my time. Maybe she was right. At 32, I felt older than I should, like life had worn me down in ways I couldn't explain. The sleep paralysis didn't help. It wasn't just the episodes themselves, the way my body turned traitor, but the way they lingered, like a bad taste you can't rinse out. I'd spend the next day jittery, checking corners, jumping at shadows. I told myself it was just my brain, just a glitch, but that night, with the shadow behind the wardrobe, it felt personal. I got up, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. The apartment was chilly, the kind of damp cold that seeps into your bones in Erie winters. I shuffled to the kitchen, flicking on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed, casting a harsh glow over the chipped countertop and the stack of dishes I hadn't touched in days. I filled the kettle, set it on the stove, and leaned against the counter, staring at the linoleum. The routine was automatic. Make coffee, stay awake, wait for the sun. But as the water started to hiss, I kept thinking about that shadow. Why there? Why behind the wardrobe? And why did it feel like it was waiting for me to notice it? I've lived alone since I moved out of my mom's place at 23. Back then, I thought being on my own would feel freeing, like I'd finally figure out who I was without my dad's voice in my head, telling me I wasn't trying hard enough. But solitude's tricky. It's quiet until it isn't, until the silence starts whispering things you don't want to hear. My apartment was my space, but it was also a reminder of how small my world had gotten. Work, Netflix, takeout, repeat. I had friends, Jake, who I'd grab a beer with sometimes, and Lena, a coworker who'd message me memes, but I kept them at arm's length. Letting people in meant explaining things like the bags under my eyes, the way I'd flinch at sudden noises. How do you tell someone you're scared of your own bedroom? The kettle clicked off, and I poured the boiling water over a scoop of instant coffee. The smell hit me, sharp and familiar, grounding me for a moment. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat sting my palms. Back in my bedroom, I avoided looking at the wardrobe. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, sipping the coffee, staring at the floor. There was a stain near the baseboard, probably from the last tenant, shaped like a lopsided star. I'd meant to clean it, but I never did. Funny how you notice things like that at 3 a.m., when your mind's looking for anything to hold on to. I thought about calling my mom. She was still in Erie, living in a small house near the old GE plant where my dad used to work. We didn't talk much anymore, not since the fight with my dad turned into a fight with her, too. I'd said things I didn't mean, about how they never got me, how they wanted me to be someone else. She'd cried, and I'd walked out, and that was 5 years ago. I missed her, though. Missed the way she'd leave a plate of empanadas on the counter for me, even when I was late coming home. Missed her voice, soft and steady, even when she was mad. But calling her now, in the middle of the night, to say what? Hey, Mom, I'm scared of a shadow? I put the phone down. The first time I saw the shadow behind the wardrobe was a few months ago, not long after I started working on a big project for the firm. It was a rebrand for some craft brewery in Pittsburgh, and I was drowning in deadlines, mock-ups, client notes. I wasn't sleeping much, living on energy drinks and late-night pizza. The paralysis episodes got worse then, coming almost every night. I'd wake up, stuck, with that shadow in the corner, always in the same spot. Sometimes it was just a blur, sometimes it felt sharper, like it had edges. Once, I thought I heard it breathe, a slow, raspy sound, like air leaking from a tire. I told myself it was my imagination, but it didn't help. I finished the coffee and set the mug on the nightstand, next to a dog-eared copy of Mouse I'd been rereading. I glanced at the wardrobe again. It was old, probably older than the building, with carved swirls on the doors that looked like they belonged in a church. I'd never opened it, didn't need to, with a closet full of clothes I barely wore. But now it felt like it was daring me, like it wanted me to look. I stood up, my heart thudding, and took a step toward it. The floor creaked under my weight, loud in the silence. I stopped, my hand hovering over the wardrobe's handle. What was I expecting to find? A monster? A ghost? Myself? I didn't open it. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed a hoodie from the floor, pulled it on, and headed to the living room. The couch was lumpy, but it was better than staying in that room. I turned on the TV, some late-night infomercial about a blender that could apparently change your life. The guy's voice was too loud, too cheerful, but I let it play, let it fill the silence. I curled up under a blanket, my eyes heavy but my mind racing. I kept thinking about the shadow, about how it felt like it was part of me, like it was something I'd been carrying for years without knowing. Growing up, I was never the tough kid. My dad wanted me to be like him, work with my hands, fix cars, play football. But I was always drawing, sketching superheroes in the margins of my notebooks, losing myself in comics. He'd roll his eyes, call it a waste of time. "You gotta be practical, Danny," he'd say. "Dreams don't pay bills." Maybe that's why I pushed myself so hard at work, why I took every project, even the ones that kept me up until dawn. I wanted to prove I wasn't just a dreamer. But the harder I pushed, the worse the paralysis got, like my body was telling me to slow down, to stop running from whatever was behind that wardrobe. I must have dozed off on the couch, because when I opened my eyes, the sky outside was gray, the first hint of dawn creeping through the blinds. The TV was still on, now selling some kind of miracle mop. I sat up, my neck stiff, my mouth dry. The apartment was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, not oppressive, just empty. I glanced toward the bedroom door, half open, the wardrobe hidden in the shadows. I didn't want to go back in there, not yet. Instead, I made another cup of coffee, the routine anchoring me. The smell of it, the warmth of the mug, the soft clink of the spoon, it was real, solid, something I could hold on to. Work that day was a blur. I logged into my laptop, answered emails, tweaked a logo for a client who'd already sent back 3 rounds of notes. My eyes kept drifting to the bedroom door, like I was waiting for something to happen. Around noon, Lena messaged me on Slack, asking how the brewery project was going. "You okay?" she added, with a little emoji of a worried face. I typed back, "Yeah, just tired," and left it at that. Lena was nice, always checking in, but I didn't know how to tell her I was falling apart over something I couldn't even explain. How do you say, "I'm scared of my own room"? I thought about my childhood again, about the nights I'd lie awake, listening to my parents argue through the thin walls. My dad's voice, loud and sharp, my mom's quieter, pleading. They fought about money, about me, about things I didn't understand. I'd draw to escape, filling notebooks with worlds where I was in control. Maybe that's why I became a designer, not just to make a living, but to create something I could shape, something that wouldn't slip away. But the sleep paralysis felt like it was undoing all that, like it was pulling me back to those nights when I felt small and powerless. By evening, I was too tired to cook, so I ordered takeout, pizza from a place down the street that always got my order wrong but was cheap enough to forgive. I ate on the couch, the TV on low, some documentary about deep-sea creatures. The narrator's voice was soothing, but my mind kept wandering back to the wardrobe. I'd read online that sleep paralysis could be triggered by stress, lack of sleep, even diet. I was guilty on all counts. But knowing that didn't make it easier to face. I wondered if the shadow was my brain's way of screaming at me, telling me to fix something. My life, my choices, myself. I decided to try something different that night. I'd read about grounding techniques, ways to calm your mind when anxiety takes over. I cleaned the apartment, not much, just enough to feel like I was in control. I washed the dishes, swept the floor, even moved the stack of sketchbooks to a shelf. The wardrobe loomed in the corner, but I ignored it, focusing on the small things, the smell of dish soap, the soft bristles of the broom. When I was done, I felt a little lighter, like I'd reclaimed a piece of my space. I took a hot shower, letting the steam loosen the knot in my chest, and promised myself I'd sleep in the living room again, just to be safe. But promises are hard to keep when you're exhausted. Around midnight, I found myself back in the bedroom, too tired to drag a blanket to the couch. I turned off the lamp, leaving just the faint glow of the streetlight outside. I lay down, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, and tried to breathe slowly, like the article said. In, out. In, out. I told myself I'd be okay, that it was just a glitch, that the shadow wasn't real. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw it again. Behind the wardrobe, a smudge of black, thicker than the shadows around it. My heart started racing, and I knew it was coming. The paralysis hit like a wave, locking me in place. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. The shadow didn't move, but it felt closer, like it was leaning over me. I tried to focus on my breathing, but my mind was screaming, "Move, move, move." I thought about my mom again, about how she'd tell me to pray when I was scared. I wasn't religious, not anymore, but I whispered a half-remembered prayer under my breath, the words tripping over themselves. The shadow stayed, unmoving, but I felt it listening, like it was waiting for me to finish. I don't know how long it lasted. maybe a minute, maybe 10. When I finally moved, it was just a twitch at first, my fingers curling against the sheets. I gasped, sitting up, my t-shirt damp with sweat. The room was empty, the shadow gone, but the air felt heavy, like it was holding onto something. I grabbed my phone, 3:17 a.m., like clockwork. I wanted to cry, to scream, to do something, but all I could do was sit there, shaking, staring at the wardrobe. I knew I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep running from it. Whatever that shadow was, it wasn't going away until I faced it. I didn't sleep again that night. I stayed up, sitting on the edge of my bed, my eyes darting to the wardrobe every few minutes. The streetlight outside flickered, casting jagged patterns across the room, and I kept telling myself it was just the light, just my tired brain playing tricks. But the feeling lingered, like a weight in my gut, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. I pulled the blanket around my shoulders, the fabric rough against my skin, and tried to focus on the sound of my own breathing. It was shallow, uneven, like I was still fighting to break free. Morning came slow, the sky outside turning from gray to a pale, washed-out blue. Erie in winter always feels like it's holding its breath, like the lake's waiting to freeze over and bury the city in quiet. I got up, my body aching from sitting too long, and shuffled to the kitchen. The coffee maker gurgled as I set it up, the smell of cheap grounds filling the air. I stood there, staring at the drip, my mind replaying the shadow, the way it seemed to lean toward me. I'd read that sleep paralysis could feel like a presence, like your brain conjures something to explain the fear. But knowing that didn't make it less real. I checked my phone, 6:43 a.m. too early to call anyone, not that I had anyone to call. Jake was probably still asleep, and Lena would be getting ready for her morning run. My mom crossed my mind again, but I pushed the thought away. Instead, I opened my laptop, hoping work would distract me. The brewery project was due in a week, and I still had a dozen revisions to make. I opened Photoshop, the screen's glow harsh against my tired eyes, and started tweaking the logo, a hoppy, retro design the client kept nitpicking. But my hands were shaky, and I kept glancing at the bedroom door, half expecting the shadow to spill out into the living room. By noon, I was a mess. My head throbbed, my eyes burned, and I'd barely gotten through one revision. Lena messaged me again, asking if I wanted to hop on a call to brainstorm. "You sure you're okay?" she wrote. "You've been quiet." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to tell her, to say something like, "I'm seeing things at night, and I'm scared to sleep." But instead, I typed, "Just swamped. Let's talk tomorrow." I hit send and felt a pang of guilt. Lena was the closest thing I had to a friend at work, but I didn't know how to let her in without sounding unhinged. I decided to get out of the apartment. I pulled on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and headed downstairs. The stairwell smelled like damp concrete and cigarette smoke, a faint reminder of the neighbor who smoked on the landing. Outside, the air was sharp, carrying the briny tang of Lake Erie. Peach Street was quiet, just a few cars rolling by, their tires hissing on the wet pavement. I walked toward the diner a few blocks away, the one with the neon sign that flickered open, even when it wasn't. The routine felt good, like I was taking back some control, even if it was just a walk. The diner was half empty, the kind of place where the coffee's always burnt and the waitresses call you Hon. I slid into a booth by the window, the vinyl seat creaking under me. The waitress, a woman with graying hair and a name tag that said Barb, poured me a coffee without asking. "Rough night?" she said, her voice kind but tired. I nodded, managing a half-smile. "Yeah, you could say that." She didn't push, just set a menu down and walked away. I stared out the window, watching a delivery truck idle at a stoplight. The normalcy of it, people going about their day, the world moving on, felt like a lifeline. I sipped the coffee, bitter and too hot, and thought about the shadow again. It wasn't just the paralysis that scared me, it was what it brought up. Memories I didn't want to touch. Like the summer I was 16, when my dad lost his job at the plant. He'd come home angry, his hands stained with grease, and I'd hide in my room, sketching to drown out the yelling. One night I had my first paralysis episode, and I saw that same shadow, not behind a wardrobe but at the foot of my bed. I thought it was my dad at first, standing there, judging me. But it wasn't him. It was something else, something that felt like it knew me. I left the diner after an hour, my stomach full of greasy eggs and toast. The walk back was colder, the wind picking up, rattling the bare trees along the sidewalk. I passed a corner store, its windows plastered with faded lottery ads, and thought about buying a pack of cigarettes, something I hadn't done since college. Instead, I kept walking, my hands stuffed in my pockets. I didn't want to go back to the apartment, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. That's the thing about Erie. It's home, but it's also a place you can feel stuck in, like the lake's pulling you back every time you try to leave. Back in the apartment, I avoided the bedroom. I worked from the couch, the TV on low for background noise. Around 3 p.m., Jake texted, asking if I wanted to grab a drink later. "Been a while, man," he wrote. I hesitated. Jake was easy to be around. He didn't ask too many questions, just talked about his job at the auto shop or the Steelers game. But I wasn't sure I could handle company, not when I felt like I was unraveling. I texted back, "Maybe tomorrow," and set the phone down. I hated how often I did that, pushing people away when I needed them most. That evening, I tried to prepare for bed like it was a mission. I read online that a consistent sleep schedule could help with sleep paralysis, so I set a routine. Shower, herbal tea, no screens an hour before bed. I boiled water for chamomile, the steam rising in lazy curls, and sat at the kitchen table, the mug warm in my hands. The apartment was quiet, just the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the building settling. I tried to focus on the tea, the floral taste, the way it warmed my throat. But my eyes kept drifting to the bedroom door, to the wardrobe waiting inside. I'd been avoiding it all day, but I knew I couldn't keep running. I stood up, my heart picking up speed, and walked to the bedroom. The wardrobe loomed in the corner, its carved doors catching the light like they were watching me. I took a deep breath and stepped closer, my hand reaching for the handle. My fingers brushed the cold metal, and I froze. What was I doing? What did I think I'd find? I stood there, my breath shallow, and then pulled my hand back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I went to bed anyway, leaving the lamp on. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to keep my mind blank. I thought about what I'd read online, how some people use visualization to cope with paralysis, picturing a safe place. I tried to imagine the lake in summer, the way the water sparkled under the sun, the sound of gulls overhead. But my mind kept pulling me back to the wardrobe, to the shadow. I closed my eyes, whispering to myself, "It's not real. It's just you." But as I drifted off, I felt it again. That weight, that presence, like the room was holding its breath. The paralysis hit harder that night. I woke up, or thought I did, my body locked, my chest tight. The shadow was there, behind the wardrobe, sharper than before. It wasn't just a smudge now. It had shape, like a figure, tall and thin, its edges blurry but deliberate. I tried to move, to scream, but nothing worked. My eyes were fixed on it, and for the first time I thought I saw it move, a slow tilt of its head, like it was studying me. My heart pounded, my breath caught in my throat. I tried to focus on my breathing, like the article said, but all I could think was, "It knows me." When it finally broke, I bolted upright, gasping, my hands shaking. The lamp was still on, casting a warm glow over the room, but the wardrobe looked darker, like it was swallowing the light. I grabbed my phone, 3:17 a.m., again. I wanted to run, to leave the apartment, to get as far from that corner as I could. But I didn't. I sat there, my knees pulled to my chest, and made a decision. I couldn't keep doing this. I had to face it, whatever it was. Not the shadow, not the wardrobe, but the thing inside me that kept bringing it back. The next morning, I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff from sleeping at an odd angle. The TV was still on, muted, showing some morning talk show with overly cheerful hosts. The apartment was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through the windows no matter how high you crank the heat. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake the fog in my head. The memory of the shadow lingered, sharp and vivid, like a bruise you can't stop pressing. I glanced at the bedroom door, half open, the wardrobe hidden in the dim light. I wasn't ready to go back in there, not yet. I made coffee, the routine automatic now. Scoop the grounds, fill the pot, wait for the gurgle. The smell was comforting, but it didn't erase the unease. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, the brewery logo staring back at me. I hadn't touched it since yesterday, and the client's latest email was sitting in my inbox, marked urgent. Need to see progress by end of day, it said. I sighed, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Work felt like trying to run through quicksand, every move slower than the last. My eyes kept drifting to the bedroom, to the thought of that shadow waiting for me. I thought about my dad again. He used to work long shifts at the GE plant, coming home with grease under his nails and a scowl that didn't fade until he'd had a beer. He'd sit at the kitchen table, just like I was now, and tell me I needed to toughen up. "Life doesn't wait for you to figure it out, Danny," he'd say. I hated that he was right, that I was still figuring things out at 32, still letting shadows scare me. I wondered what he'd think if he saw me now, jumping at corners, too afraid to sleep in my own bed. Probably call me weak, like he did when I quit the high school soccer team to focus on art. I forced myself to work, tweaking the logo's font, adjusting the colors. It was mindless, but it kept my hands busy. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. Jake, asking if I was free for that drink tonight. "Come on, man, you're turning into a hermit," he texted, with a laughing emoji. I smiled despite myself. Jake was the kind of guy who could make you feel normal, even when you weren't. I typed back, "Yeah, okay. 7 at McGarry's." He replied with a thumbs up, and for a moment I felt lighter, like maybe I could outrun this thing. But the lightness didn't last. By afternoon, the weight was back, heavier than before. I kept thinking about the shadow, about how it felt like it was part of me. I'd read that sleep paralysis could be your brain's way of processing stress, like it was projecting your fears into something you could see. If that was true, what was I so afraid of? Failure? Being alone? Or was it something deeper, something I hadn't faced since I left home? I opened a browser tab, typed "sleep paralysis coping," and skimmed the same advice I'd seen before. Stick to a sleep schedule, avoid caffeine, try meditation. I closed the tab, frustrated. It wasn't that simple. I decided to call my mom. It was impulsive, the kind of thing you do when you're desperate for something familiar. I hadn't called her in months, not since a stilted conversation at Christmas where we both pretended everything was fine. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Danny." Her voice was soft, surprised, with that faint accent she'd never lost from growing up in Puerto Rico. "Hey, Mom," I said, my throat tight. "Just checking in." There was a pause, and I could hear her moving, maybe sitting down at her own kitchen table. "You okay, Mijo?" she asked. I wanted to tell her everything. The shadow, the paralysis, the way I felt like I was losing my grip. But I just said, "Yeah, just tired. Work's been crazy." She didn't push, just told me about her garden, how the roses were struggling this year. I listened, her voice grounding me, even if I couldn't say what I needed to. After we hung up, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. I should have been honest, should have told her I was struggling. But how do you explain something like this? How do you say you're scared of something that might not even be real? I stood up, pacing the living room, the floorboards creaking under my socks. The apartment felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I needed to do something, anything, to take back control. I grabbed a notebook from the shelf, one of my old sketchbooks, and started writing. Not drawing, just words, stream of consciousness stuff about the shadow, the paralysis, the fear. It felt stupid at first, like I was talking to myself, but it helped, like I was letting the air out of a balloon that was about to burst. That evening, I met Jake at McGarry's, a dive bar a few blocks from my place. The neon sign outside buzzed, half the letters burnt out, and the air inside smelled like stale beer and fried onions. Jake was already there, sitting at the bar with a Yingling in hand, his Steelers cap tilted back. "You look like shit, man," he said, grinning as I slid onto the stool next to him. "Thanks," I muttered, ordering a beer. We talked about nothing important. His job, the new guy at the auto shop who kept screwing up, the weather turning colder. It was easy, comfortable, but I kept glancing at the door, like I was expecting the shadow to follow me here. After a couple beers, Jake leaned back, eyeing me. "You sure you're good, Danny? You're kinda off." I shrugged, tracing a finger through the condensation on my glass. "Just not sleeping well," I said. He nodded, like he got it, but I could tell he didn't, not really. How could he? Jake was the kind of guy who slept like a rock, who didn't overthink every little thing. I envied that. We stayed until 9, and when I left, the night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp. I walked home, my hands in my pockets, the streets quiet except for the occasional car or distant siren. Back in the apartment, I felt the weight settle in again. I tried to stick to my new routine. Tea, no screens, early bedtime. I sat on the couch with a mug of chamomile, the steam curling up, and flipped through my sketchbook. The pages were filled with old drawings, superheroes, cityscapes, faces I didn't recognize anymore. Tucked between them was a photo from when I was 10, me and my mom at Presque Isle, smiling on the beach. I looked happy, carefree, like I didn't know what fear was. I wondered when that changed, when I started carrying this weight. I went to bed, leaving the lamp on again. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to visualize the lake, the way the waves lapped at the shore. But my mind kept pulling me back to the wardrobe, to the shadow. I closed my eyes, whispering, "It's not real," over and over, like a mantra. Sleep came slowly, heavy, like sinking into deep water. And then it hit, the paralysis, locking me in place. The shadow was there, sharper now, its edges almost human. It didn't move, but I felt it watching, waiting. My heart pounded, my breath shallow, but this time I didn't fight it. I let it happen, let the fear wash over me, and for the first time I thought I heard it, a whisper low and indistinct, like it was trying to tell me something. When I broke free, I sat up, gasping, my hands trembling. The lamp buzzed, the room unchanged, but I felt different, like I'd crossed a line. I grabbed my notebook and started writing again, my pen moving fast, spilling out everything. The shadow, the whisper, the way it felt like it knew me. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words blurred on the page. When I stopped, it was 4 a.m., and the apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a gift. I lay back down, the notebook next to me, and closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I slept without dreaming. The next few days were better, or at least less heavy. I stuck to my routine, coffee in the morning, work during the day, tea at night. I finished the brewery logo, sent it to the client, and got a rare "looks great" in response. Lena called to celebrate, her voice bright over the phone. "Told you you'd nail it," she said. I smiled, feeling a flicker of pride. But the shadow was still there, in the back of my mind, waiting for the next night. I knew it wasn't gone, not really. It was part of me, like the sketches in my notebook, like the memories I couldn't shake. I started researching sleep paralysis again, diving deeper this time. I found forums where people shared their stories. shadow figures, voices, the feeling of being watched. One person wrote about visualizing a light, picturing it pushing the darkness away. I tried it that night, lying in bed, imagining a soft glow spreading from my chest. It felt silly, but it helped, like I was building a wall between me and the shadow. When the paralysis hit, it was less intense, the shadow fainter, like it was losing its grip. I woke up at 3:17, as always, but I didn't panic. I just breathed, slow and steady, and waited for the morning. The days blurred together after that. I kept up the routine, clinging to it like a lifeline. Coffee in the morning, work during the day, chamomile tea at night, and writing in my notebook whenever the thoughts got too loud. The brewery project wrapped up, and the firm sent me a new one, a website redesign for a local nonprofit in Erie, something about community gardens. It was straightforward, the kind of work that didn't demand too much but kept my mind occupied. I sat at my laptop, the screen's glow reflecting off my face, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was getting a grip. But the shadow didn't disappear completely. It was still there, lurking in the corner of my mind, waiting for a weak moment. One afternoon, as I was mocking up a layout, my phone rang. It was my mom, calling back. "Danny, I was thinking about you," she said, her voice warm but hesitant. "You sounded off the other day. You sure everything's okay?" I paused, my cursor hovering over the screen. I wanted to brush it off, but something stopped me. "Actually, Mom, I've been having these weird nights. Like, I wake up and can't move, and I see things." There was a silence, and then she sighed. "Oh, Mijo, that sounds like the bruja's touch. Your abuela used to talk about it. She said it was spirits, but I always thought it was stress." We talked for an hour, longer than we had in years. She told me stories from her childhood in San Juan, about nights when she felt pinned down, like something was sitting on her chest. "I learned to breathe through it," she said. "Just breathe and tell yourself you're stronger." It wasn't scientific, but it felt real, like she was giving me a piece of herself. When we hung up, I felt lighter, like the shadow had lost a little power. I wrote about it in my notebook that night, the pen scratching against the paper, the words flowing easier now. Work picked up, and I started chatting more with Lena. She was based in Pittsburgh, but we did video calls for brainstorming. "You seem better," she said one day, her face pixelated on my screen. "Less zombie-like." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "Yeah, sleeping better. Mostly." I didn't tell her about the shadow, not yet, but talking to her felt good, like I was opening a door I'd kept shut for too long. We talked about the project, but it drifted to personal stuff, her weekend hikes, my sketches. "You should show me some of your art sometime," she said. "I'd love to see what you do outside of logos." I promised I would, and for the first time, I meant it. The paralysis episodes came less often, and when they did, they were milder. One night, I woke up stuck, the shadow faint in the corner, more like a memory than a threat. I focused on my breathing, in and out, imagining that light spreading from my chest. The whisper was there again, low and indistinct, but this time I tried to listen, to make out the words. It sounded like my own voice, echoing back things I'd thought but never said, regrets about my dad, fears of being alone, doubts about my work. When the paralysis broke, I didn't panic. I sat up, turned on the lamp, and wrote it all down, the words spilling out like they had a life of their own. I started sketching again, not just for work. I pulled out my old pencils, the ones with the chewed ends, and drew the shadow. Not as a monster, but as a figure, blurred and human, standing behind the wardrobe. It was therapeutic, like putting it on paper made it less scary. I showed one to Lena during our next call, holding it up to the camera. "That's intense," she said, her eyes wide. "What's it mean?" I shrugged. "Just something from my dreams. Or nightmares." She nodded, like she got it, and we moved on, but I felt seen, like I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. Jake and I grabbed beers again, this time at a place by the lake. The wind was sharp off the water, carrying the smell of fish and wet sand. We sat outside, bundled in jackets, watching the waves crash against the pier. "You look better," he said, clinking his bottle against mine. "Whatever was eating you, you shake it?" I took a sip, the beer cold and bitter. "Not completely. But I'm working on it." He didn't press, just nodded and talked about his latest fix-up job, a '67 Mustang that was giving him hell. Being with him, listening to his stories, reminded me that life wasn't all shadows and silence. There were people, connections, if I let them in. One weekend, I drove to Presque Isle, the peninsula jutting into the lake. It was a place I'd gone as a kid, with my parents before things got complicated. The air was crisp, the paths lined with bare trees, their branches reaching like fingers. I walked the trails, my boots crunching on gravel, the sound of waves constant in the background. I thought about the photo in my sketchbook, the happy kid on the beach. What would he think of me now? I sat on a bench, watching the water, and let the thoughts come. The shadow wasn't a demon or a spirit. It was me, the parts I'd ignored, the fears I'd buried. Accepting that didn't make it go away, but it made it manageable. Back home, I finally opened the wardrobe. It was a Saturday afternoon, the sun streaming through the blinds, casting golden patterns on the floor. I stood in front of it, my hand steady on the handle, and pulled. The doors creaked open, revealing empty shelves, dust bunnies, and a forgotten sweater from the previous tenant. No shadow, no secrets, just emptiness. I laughed, the sound echoing in the room, and felt a weight lift. It was silly, but it was a step, like claiming the space as mine. The episodes still came, but they were different now. One night, the paralysis hit, the shadow appearing faintly behind the wardrobe. I breathed through it, listening to the whisper, which sounded clearer now, like regrets about not calling my dad, about letting years slip by. When I woke, I grabbed my phone and texted him. "Hey, Dad. Been a while. How are you?" It was simple, but it felt huge. He didn't reply right away, but that was okay. I'd started the conversation. My mom came over the next week. She brought empanadas, still warm from the oven, the smell filling the apartment. We sat at the kitchen table, talking about everything and nothing. "I'm proud of you, Danny," she said, her hand on mine, "for facing it." I told her more about the shadow, the paralysis, and she listened, her eyes soft. "Sometimes the scariest things are inside us," she said. "But that's where the strength is, too." We hugged when she left, and for the first time in years, it felt real, not forced. Lena and I started talking outside of work, messaging about books, music, even planning a trip to Pittsburgh someday. "You should come visit," she said. "Get out of Erie for a bit." The idea excited me, like a door opening to something new. I sketched more, filling pages with scenes from my life, the lake, the diner, the wardrobe. I even drew the shadow as a friend, not an enemy, standing beside me. The nights got easier. I'd lie in bed, the lamp off now, the room dark but not threatening. When the paralysis came, I'd breathe, listen, and wait. The shadow whispered less, its form fader, like it was retreating. I learned to accept the fear, to let it pass without fighting. It wasn't about controlling it, it was about living with it, understanding it was part of me. One night, I woke up at 3:17, the paralysis holding me, but the shadow was gone. The room was quiet, the wardrobe just a piece of furniture. I breathed, slow and deep, and felt peace. When I could move, I sat up, the blanket pooling around me, and smiled. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was calm, like the lake after a storm. Life went on. Work, friends, sketches. I called my dad more, short conversations that got longer over time. "Sorry for being hard on you," he said one day. I was hard on myself, too. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The shadow didn't come back, not really. Sometimes I'd feel a twinge, a faint whisper, but I'd breathe through it, remember I was stronger. I think about those nights now, lying awake, the city quiet outside my window. The wardrobe still stands in the corner, a reminder. But it's just wood, just a thing. The real shadows are inside, and facing them is how you find the light. Sometimes I still wake up, heart racing. But I don't fight it anymore. I just breathe, and wait for the silence to remind me that I'm still here. The weeks that followed felt like a slow climb out of a fog. I stuck to my routine: coffee in the morning, work during the day, chamomile tea at night, and pages in my notebook filled with thoughts I didn't know I had until I wrote them down. The apartment didn't feel as heavy anymore, like the air had cleared, even if the shadow still lingered in my mind. I started to see it differently, not as a threat, but as a mirror, reflecting the parts of me I'd ignored for too long. It wasn't gone, but it was quieter, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. Work became a refuge. The non-profit project was straightforward, but I poured myself into it, sketching layouts by hand before digitizing them. The community garden group wanted something vibrant, something that felt like growth, and I found myself sketching plants and flowers, their roots tangling into patterns that reminded me of the carvings on the wardrobe. I sent the first draft to the client, and they loved it, which felt like a small victory. Lena noticed, too. "You're killing it lately," she said during a call, her voice bright through my laptop speakers. "What's got you so inspired?" I shrugged, my webcam catching my half-smile. "Just trying to keep up," I said, but inside, I knew it was more than that. It was like I was drawing my way out of the dark. I started talking to my mom more, short calls that turned into longer ones. She'd tell me about her roses, about the neighbor's dog that kept digging up her yard, about the time she and my dad went dancing in Cleveland before I was born. "He wasn't always so serious, you know," she said one evening, her voice soft over the phone. "He loved you, Danny, even if he didn't know how to show it." I swallowed hard, staring at the coffee ring on my kitchen table. "Yeah, I know," I said, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Still, her words stuck with me, like a seed planted in dry soil. One night, I decided to face the wardrobe again. It was a Tuesday, the sky outside a deep gray, the kind that promises snow. I stood in my bedroom, the lamp casting a warm glow, and opened the doors. The hinges creaked, the sound loud in the quiet. Inside, it was still empty, just dust and that old sweater, its sleeves sagging like they were tired. I reached in, my fingers brushing the back wall, expecting something, anything, but it was just wood, cold and solid. I laughed, the sound sharp, and closed the doors. It felt like a ritual, like I was telling the shadow I wasn't afraid anymore. The paralysis episodes were fewer now, and when they came, they were less intense. One night, I woke up frozen, the familiar weight on my chest, but the shadow was faint, almost transparent. I didn't panic. I breathed, slow and deep, picturing that light in my chest, the one I'd read about online. The whisper was there, too, but it was softer, like a memory fading. I thought I heard my own voice saying, "You're enough." When I broke free, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, a strange calm settling over me. I grabbed my notebook and wrote it down, the words messy but real. I'm enough. Jake and I started hanging out more, too. We'd meet at McGarry's or grab takeout and watch old action movies at his place, the kind with explosions and one-liners. One night, over greasy wings and a die-hard marathon, he asked about my sketches. "You still drawing those comics?" he said, wiping sauce off his chin. I nodded, pulling out my phone to show him a few, the shadow, the lake, a rough portrait of my mom. "Damn, man," he said, scrolling through. "This is good. You ever think about doing something with it?" I shrugged, but his words stuck with me, like maybe my drawings weren't just a way to cope but something worth sharing. Lena came to Erie for a weekend, a rare visit since she usually stayed in Pittsburgh. We met at a coffee shop downtown, one of those places with exposed brick and overpriced lattes. She wore a green scarf, her hair pulled back, and she smiled when she saw me, like she was genuinely happy to be there. We talked for hours, about work, about her hikes in the Alleghenies, about my sketches. "You should do an exhibit or something," she said, stirring her coffee. "Your stuff's got soul." I laughed it off, but the idea lingered, like a spark I hadn't noticed before. That night, I took her to Presque Isle. The lake was calm, the sky clear, stars scattered like spilled sugar. We walked the beach, our boots sinking into the sand, the air sharp with salt and cold. "This place is beautiful," she said, her breath clouding in front of her. I nodded, remembering that photo from when I was a kid. "Yeah, it's home," I said, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. We stood there, watching the water, and I told her about the shadow, the paralysis, not holding back. She listened, her eyes steady, and when I finished, she said, "That sounds terrifying. But you're stronger than you think." It was simple, but it meant everything. I texted my dad again, a longer message this time. "Hey, Dad. I've been thinking about you. Can we talk soon?" He replied the next day, just a short, "Yeah, let's do it." We set a time to meet, at a diner near his place in Buffalo. I drove up on a Saturday, the road lined with bare trees and patches of snow. He looked older, his hair grayer, but his handshake was firm. "Good to see you, Danny," he said, and I could tell he meant it. We talked over coffee and pancakes, awkward at first, but it got easier. I told him about my work, my sketches, even the paralysis. He listened, his eyes softening. "I had nightmares after the plant closed," he said. "Never told anyone. Guess we're more alike than I thought." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. The paralysis episodes became rare, like echoes fading. One night, I woke up at 3:17, the familiar weight holding me down. But there was no shadow, just the wardrobe, quiet and ordinary. I breathed through it, my heart steady, and when I could move, I didn't reach for my notebook. I just lay there, the room dark, the silence soft. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the shadow, not of myself. The fear was still there, but it was smaller, something I could carry without breaking. I started showing my sketches online, posting them on Instagram with short captions about the stories behind them. People responded, strangers, friends, even Lena, who commented, "Told you your stuff has soul." It felt good, like I was letting the world see a piece of me I'd kept hidden. I even started a series about the shadow, not as a monster but as a companion, a reminder of what I'd faced. The comments poured in, people sharing their own stories of sleep paralysis, of fear, of finding light in the dark. It was like a conversation I didn't know I needed. My mom came over again, this time with a photo album from when I was a kid. We sat on the couch, flipping through pages of birthday parties, trips to the lake, my dad teaching me to ride a bike. "You were always so serious," she said, laughing. "Even as a kid, you thought too much." I smiled, seeing myself in those photos, a kid who didn't know about shadows yet. I told her about my sketches, about posting them online, and her eyes lit up. "That's my Danny," she said. "Always telling stories." The wardrobe stayed in its corner, a silent witness to my nights. I didn't see the shadow anymore, not like before. Sometimes I'd wake up, heart racing, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, and let it pass. I learned to listen to the silence, to find peace in it. The fear wasn't gone, but it wasn't in charge. I was, and that was enough. The months that followed felt like a slow exhale. I settled into a rhythm, work, sketches, calls with my mom, beers with Jake, messages with Lena. The apartment didn't feel like a cage anymore. It was just home, with its creaky floors and chipped paint. The wardrobe stood in its corner, no longer a looming presence but just a piece of furniture, gathering dust like everything else. I'd open its doors sometimes, not out of fear but curiosity, running my fingers over the carved wood, wondering about the hands that made it. There was no shadow, no whisper, just silence, and I was okay with that. Work kept me busy. The nonprofit loved the website design, and they asked me to do a series of posters for their garden events. I spent evenings sketching, blending bold greens and earthy browns, letting the ideas flow. It wasn't just about the paycheck anymore. It was about creating something that felt alive. Lena noticed the change during our calls. "You're different," she said one afternoon, her face framed by the laptop screen. "Like you're not carrying the world anymore." I laughed, scratching the back of my neck. "Maybe I'm just tired of carrying it," I said. She smiled, and for a moment I wondered what it'd be like to see her in person more often, not just as a coworker but as something more. I started going to Presque Isle regularly, not just for nostalgia but because it grounded me. I'd walk the trails, the lake stretching out like a gray mirror, the air sharp with salt and pine. One Sunday, I brought my sketchbook, sitting on a bench to draw the horizon. The pencil moved easily, capturing the curve of the shore, the way the light hit the water. A couple walking by stopped to look, the woman peering over my shoulder. "That's beautiful," she said, her voice warm. "You sell these?" I shook my head, surprised. "Just for me," I said, but her words stuck with me, like Jake's had. Maybe my sketches were more than a coping mechanism. Maybe they were a way to connect. My dad and I kept talking, not every day but enough to feel like progress. We met up again, this time in Erie at the diner on Peach Street. He looked less guarded, his shoulders looser, like he was trying, too. "I was tough on you," he said over a plate of fries, his voice low. "Didn't know how to be anything else." I nodded, stirring my coffee. "I get it," I said, and I did. He wasn't perfect, but neither was I. We talked about his new job, driving trucks across state lines, and my sketches, which he actually asked to see. I showed him one on my phone, a rough drawing of the lake. He squinted, then nodded. "You got talent, Danny." Always did. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The paralysis episodes were rare now, almost like memories themselves. When they came, they were fleeting, the shadow barely there, more like a flicker than a presence. One night, I woke up at 3:17, my body locked, but there was no fear. I breathed, slow and steady, picturing the lake, the way the waves moved without rushing. The shadow didn't appear, and when I could move, I didn't reach for my notebook. I just lay there, the room dark, the silence soft like a blanket. I realized I wasn't fighting anymore. I was living. I posted more sketches online, and the response grew. People left comments, some about the art, some about their own struggles with sleep, fear, loneliness. One message stood out, from a woman in Ohio who said my shadow drawings reminded her of her own nightmares. "They make me feel less alone," she wrote. I read it over and over, my chest tight. I hadn't expected that, hadn't thought my scribbles could mean something to someone else. I replied, "You're not alone," and meant it. It was like the shadow had become a bridge, not a barrier. Lena visited again, this time for a whole weekend. We drove to the peninsula, walked the trails, and ate takeout on my couch, laughing at some terrible horror movie. "You're different out here," she said, her eyes catching the lamplight. "Less in your head." I smiled, leaning back. Trying to be. We talked late into the night, about her dreams of opening a bookstore, my sketches, the way Erie felt like a place you could love and hate at the same time. When she left, she hugged me, her scarf brushing my cheek, and I felt a warmth I hadn't in years. My mom started coming over more, bringing food or just herself. One evening, we sat on the couch, the photo album open between us. She pointed to a picture of me at 5, holding a crayon like it was a sword. "You were always making something," she said, her voice soft. I told her about the sketches, the comments online, the way it felt to share. She squeezed my hand. "That's you, Mijo. That's your heart." I hugged her, the smell of her perfume familiar, like home. I decided to open the wardrobe one last time, not because I was afraid but because I needed to close the loop. It was a quiet Saturday, the apartment filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of a distant lawnmower. I pulled the doors open, the hinges creaking softly. Inside was the same. Dust, the sweater, nothing more. I took the sweater out, folded it, and set it in a box for donation. The wardrobe stood empty, just wood and shadow, no longer heavy with meaning. I closed the doors and felt done, like I'd said goodbye to something I didn't need anymore. The paralysis stopped coming after that. Nights were just nights, dark and quiet, with the hum of the city outside. I slept with the lamp off, the room bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Sometimes I'd wake at 3:17, my heart racing for no reason, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, and let it pass. The silence wasn't a threat anymore. It was a reminder that I was here, alive, moving forward. I kept sketching, posting, connecting with people who saw themselves in my work. I talked to my dad, my mom, Lena, Jake, building bridges where I'd once built walls. One night, I sat on my couch, a sketchbook open in my lap, the lake drawn in sharp lines across the page. I thought about the shadow, how it had been a part of me, my fear, my doubt, my past. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it didn't control me. I'd learned to breathe through it, to listen to it, to let it be. I closed the sketchbook, the apartment quiet around me, and felt a peace I hadn't known I could find. Sometimes I still wake up, heart racing, the darkness thick. But I don't fight it anymore. I just breathe, and wait for the silence to remind me that I'm still here. The weeks after that night felt like a new chapter, though I didn't think of it that way at the time. Life in Erie had a way of settling into patterns. Work, walks by the lake, the hum of the city winding down at night. I kept sketching, filling pages with scenes that felt like pieces of myself. The wardrobe, the lake, my mom's hands holding a plate of empanadas. The shadow didn't come back, not like before, but I carried its memory, like a scar that doesn't hurt but reminds you it's there. I started to see it as a guide, not a ghost, something that pushed me to face what I'd been avoiding. I dove deeper into my art, posting sketches online with stories behind them. The response was humbling. A guy from Cleveland messaged me, saying my shadow drawings made him feel seen, like someone else understood the weight of sleepless nights. A woman in Philly commented that my lake sketches reminded her of home. Each message was a thread, connecting me to people I'd never meet, but who felt close in a way I hadn't expected. I started a small series, calling it Shadows and Light, blending my paralysis experiences with scenes from Erie. It wasn't just therapy now. It was a conversation. Lena became a bigger part of my life. We texted daily, not just about work but about everything. Her love of old jazz records, my obsession with graphic novels, the way we both hated winter but loved the quiet it brought. She came to Erie again, this time staying at my place for a long weekend. We cooked together, burning a batch of rice because we were too busy laughing about some dumb client request. "You're a terrible chef," she teased, scraping the charred bits into the trash. I grinned, handing her a beer. "Yeah, but I'm great at ordering pizza." We sat on the couch, the TV off, the apartment warm with the smell of takeout and the sound of her laughter. One night, as we lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, she asked about the wardrobe. "You ever think about getting rid of it?" she said, her voice soft in the dark. I turned to her, the streetlight casting shadows across her face. "Thought about it," I said. "But it's part of the place now. Part of me." She nodded, like she understood, and squeezed my hand. I told her about the shadow, the paralysis, the way it felt like it was teaching me something. "Sounds like it made you stronger," she said. I didn't reply, just held her hand tighter, feeling like maybe she was right. My dad and I kept meeting up, usually at the diner in Buffalo. It was easier now, less like walking on eggshells. One Sunday, he showed up with an old photo of us at a baseball game, me in a too big Yankees cap, him grinning like he didn't have a care in the world. "Found this in a box," he said, sliding it across the table. I looked at it, my throat tight. "I don't remember this," I said. He shrugged. "You were 6. Happiest kid I knew." We talked about the past, not shying away from the hard stuff, the fights, the silence, the years we lost. "I wasn't good at being a dad," he said, his voice low. "But I'm trying now." I nodded, stirring my coffee. "Me too." My mom started inviting me over for dinner, real home-cooked meals like when I was a kid. One night, she made arroz con pollo, the kitchen filled with the smell of saffron and garlic. We sat at her small table, the radio playing soft salsa in the background. "You're doing good, Danny," she said, her eyes warm. "I see it in you." I told her about the sketches, the messages from strangers, the way it felt to share. She smiled, passing me a plate. "That's your gift." "Always was." I ate, the flavors familiar, like a memory I could taste. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was disappointing her. I started teaching myself meditation, not the fancy kind but simple stuff, sitting on the couch, closing my eyes, focusing on my breath. It was hard at first, my mind racing with deadlines and doubts, but I kept at it. One evening, I sat there, the apartment quiet, the lake's hum faint through the window. I pictured the shadow, not as a figure but as a feeling, fear, regret, the weight of things unsaid. I breathed through it, letting it sit without pushing it away. When I opened my eyes, the room felt lighter, like I'd let go of something small but heavy. The paralysis episodes were gone now, or so faint they didn't matter. One night, I woke up at 3:17, my body heavy but not locked. There was no shadow, no whisper, just the quiet of my room. I lay there, listening to the city outside, a car passing, a dog barking somewhere down the street. I didn't need to write it down or sketch it. I just let it be. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, like the lake at dawn, calm but alive. I closed my eyes and slept, the kind of sleep that feels like coming home. I decided to do something with my sketches, something bigger. Lena helped me organize a small exhibit at a community center in Erie, a low-key event with coffee and folding chairs. I hung my drawings on the walls, scenes of the lake, the wardrobe, the shadow, all in stark black and white with splashes of color. People came, more than I expected. Locals, co-workers, even Jake, who showed up in his Steelers cap, looking out of place but proud. "This is cool, man," he said, staring at a sketch of the shadow. "Didn't know you had this in you." I smiled, feeling exposed but not afraid. My mom came, too, her eyes shining as she walked through the exhibit. She stopped at a drawing of her hands, holding a rose from her garden. "This is me?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, Mom. It's you." She hugged me, her perfume wrapping around me like a memory. Later, Lena stood beside me, her arm brushing mine. "You did it," she whispered. I looked at her, the room buzzing with quiet voices, and felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My dad sent a text that night, "Heard about your show. Wish I could have been there. Proud of you." It was short, but it hit me hard. I replied, "Thanks, Dad. Next time." And I meant it. The distance between us wasn't gone, but it was smaller, like a crack in the pavement you could step over. I kept sketching, posting, connecting, each drawing a piece of the puzzle I was putting together. My fears, my past, my hope. The wardrobe stayed in its corner, a quiet reminder of the nights I'd faced. I didn't see the shadow anymore, not even in my dreams. But I knew it was still there, in the way you know a scar is there even when it fades. It was part of me, the part that taught me to breathe, to listen, to keep going. I'd wake up some nights, heart racing, the clock glowing 3:17. But I'd lie there, the darkness soft around me, and breathe. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine, a space where I could rest. I'd close my eyes, the lake's rhythm in my mind, and know I was enough. The days kept moving, each one layering over the last like pages in my sketchbook. Erie's winter settled in, the lake freezing at the edges, the air sharp enough to sting your face. I'd walk to the diner some mornings, the one with Barb and the burnt coffee, just to feel the rhythm of the city. Cars slushing through snow, the neon sign flickering like it was on its last legs. My apartment felt warmer now, not because of the space heater but because I was filling it with something new. Sketches piled up on my desk, half-finished ideas spilling over into late nights, the pencil scratching against paper like a heartbeat. I started experimenting with my art, mixing ink and watercolor to capture the way the lake looked at dawn, all grays and soft blues. I'd post them online, and the comments kept coming. People saying the drawings felt like stories, like they could see themselves in the lines. One night, I got a message from a gallery in Pittsburgh, a small place that showcased local artists. "Love your Shadows and Light series," they wrote. "Interested in a solo show?" I stared at the screen, my coffee going cold. A show. A real one. I typed back, "Let's talk," my hands shaking a little, like I was standing at the edge of something big. Lena was the first person I told. We were on a video call, her in her cozy Pittsburgh apartment, me in my cluttered living room. "Danny, that's huge," she said, her eyes lighting up. "You're doing it, aren't you?" "You have to." I laughed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. It's a lot." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice firm. "You're ready. I know you are." We talked logistics, frames, prints, how I'd get to Pittsburgh, but mostly we talked about what it meant. To put my work out there, to let people see the shadows I'd carried. It felt like opening the wardrobe all over again, but this time I wasn't afraid. My mom came over the next day, bringing a pot of sancocho that filled the apartment with the smell of cilantro and beef. We ate at the kitchen table, the radio playing low, some old merengue tune she hummed along to. I told her about the gallery, and her face broke into a smile that made her look younger. "Mijo, that's your dream," she said, her hand on mine. "You're not just drawing pictures. You're telling the world who you are." I nodded, my throat tight, and showed her the latest sketch, a silhouette of the wardrobe, soft light spilling around it. She traced the lines with her finger, like she could feel the weight of it. "This is you," she said. "All of it." I drove to Buffalo to see my dad, the road slick with ice, the heater in my car barely keeping up. We met at the same diner, the one with the sticky menus and the jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I told him about the gallery, expecting him to brush it off, but he leaned forward, his coffee mug cradled in his hands. "That's something, Danny," he said. "You're making your own way." He paused, his eyes on the table. "I never gave you enough credit for that." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, the silence between us softer now, like we were finally speaking the same language. The gallery prep took over my life. I spent nights framing prints, choosing which sketches to show, some from the Paralysis days, some from the lake, a few of my mom's hands or the city's quiet streets. Lena came to Erie to help, her energy cutting through my nerves. We worked in my living room, surrounded by paper and ink, laughing when we smudged a print or spilled coffee on a mat. "This is gonna be amazing," she said, taping a frame shut. I looked at her, her hair falling in her face, and felt something shift, like a door I hadn't realized was closed was creaking open. The show was on a Saturday, the Pittsburgh Gallery a small space with brick walls and warm lights. I stood by my sketches, my palms sweaty, as people wandered through, sipping wine and murmuring. Lena was there, wearing that green scarf, her smile steadying me. Jake showed up, too, looking awkward in a button-up shirt but grinning like he was proud. My mom came, her eyes shining as she hugged me in front of a crowd. "This is you, Danny," she whispered. I saw my dad later, standing quietly by a sketch of the lake. "Good work," he said, his voice low but real. I nodded, feeling like I'd carried something heavy across a finish line. The paralysis was a memory now, a faint echo that didn't scare me anymore. I'd wake sometimes, heart racing, the clock glowing 3:17, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, and let it pass. The wardrobe stood in its corner, just wood and dust, no longer a shadow's home. I'd open it sometimes, not to check for anything but to remind myself I could. The empty shelves felt like a promise, like I'd made space for something new. After the show, I kept sketching, kept posting. The gallery sold a few prints, and the comments online grew, people sharing their own stories, their own shadows. I started a blog, nothing fancy, just a place to write about the paralysis, the art, the way they intertwined. I wrote about breathing through fear, about listening to the silence, about finding light in the dark. It wasn't advice, just my truth, and it resonated. A woman in Seattle wrote, "Your words make me feel like I can face my nights." I read it late one night, the apartment quiet, and felt like I was part of something bigger. Lena and I started dating, not with a big moment but a slow, natural shift. We'd drive to the lake, sit on the beach, and talk about everything. Her dreams, my fears, the way the world felt both heavy and hopeful. One night, we lay on a blanket at Presque Isle, the stars bright above us, the waves a steady rhythm. "You're not scared anymore," she said, her head on my shoulder. I thought about the shadow, the wardrobe, the nights I thought I'd never get through. "Not like I was," I said. She kissed me, soft and warm, and I felt like I was home. My dad and I kept rebuilding, piece by piece. We'd meet for coffee, sometimes in Erie, sometimes in Buffalo. He started telling me stories, about his own dad, about the plant closing, about the nights he lay awake, too. "Didn't know how to talk about it," he said one day, his hands wrapped around a mug. "Guess I'm learning." I smiled, seeing myself in him, the way we both carried things we didn't say. I showed him more sketches, and he started asking about them, not just out of politeness but because he cared. My mom and I grew closer, too. She'd come over with food or I'd go to her place, helping with her garden or just sitting on her porch, the air thick with summer's end. She'd talk about Puerto Rico, about her mom's stories of spirits and strength. "You've got that strength, Danny," she said one evening, handing me a glass of iced tea. "Always did." I believed her now, not because I felt strong but because I'd learned to keep going, even when I didn't. The apartment became my studio, my sanctuary. I'd work late, the lamp casting soft shadows, the city humming outside. I'd sketch, write, breathe. The wardrobe was just furniture now, its doors closed but not locked. I didn't need to open them to know what was inside, nothing but space, ready for whatever I chose to fill it with. The silence of my nights was different now, not heavy but full, like the lake at dawn, calm and waiting. Sometimes I'd wake at 3:17, my heart a little fast, the room dark around me. I'd lie there, listening to the quiet, the faint creak of the building, the distant hum of a car. I didn't fight it anymore, didn't reach for a notebook or a light. I just breathed, slow and deep, feeling the world settle around me. The shadow was gone, but it had left something behind, a reminder that fear wasn't the enemy, just a part of me that needed to be heard. I'd close my eyes, the lake in my mind, and know I was enough, not because I'd won but because I was still here, still breathing, still drawing my way through the dark. The rhythm of my days in Erie became a kind of music, steady and familiar, like the waves on Lake Erie's shore. Winter gave way to a hesitant spring, the ice melting into slush, the air softening with the smell of wet earth. I'd walk to the diner most mornings, nodding to Barb as she poured my coffee, the mug warm in my hands. My apartment was no longer just a place to crash. It was a canvas, its walls lined with sketches pinned up haphazardly, bursts of ink and color that told my story. The wardrobe stood quietly in its corner, its carved doors catching the morning light, no longer a source of dread but a marker of how far I'd come. My art took on a life of its own. The Pittsburgh Gallery Show was a turning point, not because it made me famous, hardly, but because it showed me I could share without breaking. I kept posting online, my Shadows and Light series growing with new sketches, the silhouette of my mom's house, its porch sagging under years of memories, the diner's neon sign, flickering like a heartbeat, Lena's hands curled around a coffee cup. The comments kept coming, from people in places I'd never been, Toledo, Boise, Raleigh, saying my work made them feel less alone. One guy wrote, "Your shadows are mine, too." I read it late one night, the apartment quiet, and felt a connection that was bigger than me. Lena and I were steady now, not just dating but building something real. She'd drive up from Pittsburgh every other weekend, her car packed with books and snacks, her green scarf tossed over the couch like it belonged there. We'd cook together, laughing when the rice stuck to the pan again, or walk to Presque Isle, our boots crunching on gravel paths. One evening, as we sat on the beach, the lake glinting under a pink sky, she leaned against me, her hair brushing my cheek. "You're different now," she said. "Like you're not hiding anymore." I kissed her forehead, the air cool around us. "Took me a while," I said, and she smiled, her hand finding mine. My dad started calling more, not just for diner meetups but to check in, his voice gruff but warm. One day, he sent me a photo of a sketch I'd given him, framed on his apartment wall. "Looks good here," he texted. I stared at the message, my throat tight. We met up in Erie that weekend, at a new place near the lake, a bar with string lights and a view of the water. He talked about his trucking routes, the way the open road felt free but lonely. "Missed a lot with you," he said, his eyes on his beer. "Wish I'd done better." I nodded, stirring the ice in my glass. "We're here now," I said, and it felt like enough. My mom's visits became a ritual, her bringing food or flowers from her garden, me helping her weed the yard or fix a leaky faucet. One afternoon, we sat on her porch, the air thick with the smell of roses and cut grass. She handed me a photo album I hadn't seen before, filled with pictures of her and my dad when they were young, dancing in a club, laughing on a boardwalk, looking like they believed the world was theirs. "We were happy once," she said, her voice soft. I looked at her, seeing the lines around her eyes, the strength in her hands. "You're still happy," I said. She smiled, squeezing my arm. "So are you, Mijo." I kept up the meditation, carving out time each evening to sit quietly, breathing in the silence. It wasn't about erasing the fear but making room for it, letting it sit without taking over. I'd close my eyes, the apartment dark except for the glow of streetlights, and picture the lake, its waves steady and endless. Sometimes I'd think about the shadow, how it used to feel like a weight, a warning. Now it was just a memory, a part of me I didn't need to fight. I'd open my eyes, the room calm, and feel like I was carrying less. The gallery reached out again, asking for another show, this time with new work. I said yes, the decision easier now. I spent weeks preparing, sketching scenes from my life, the wardrobe, the lake, my parents' faces, Lena's smile. I called it Finding Light, a nod to the journey I was still on. The show was bigger this time, more people, more buzz. Jake showed up, his Steelers cap swapped for a beanie, clapping me on the back like I'd won something. Lena was there, helping hang frames, her laughter cutting through the chaos. My mom and dad came together, a rare sight, standing side by side as they looked at my work. "Proud of you, Danny," my dad said, his hand on my shoulder. My mom just hugged me, her eyes wet. The paralysis was gone now, or so faint it didn't matter. I'd wake some nights, the clock glowing 3:17, my heart a little fast, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, and let it pass. The wardrobe was just furniture, its doors closed but not locked. I'd open them sometimes, not to check for shadows but to remind myself I could. The empty shelves were a canvas, a space for whatever came next. I'd stand there, the room quiet, and feel a peace that wasn't fragile, like it could hold. My blog grew, too, a mix of sketches and stories about the shadow, the lake, the nights I thought I'd never get through. People commented, sharing their own fears, sleep paralysis, anxiety, loss. I'd reply, not with answers but with honesty, saying I was still figuring it out, too. One woman wrote, "Your story makes me want to try again." I read it, the apartment dark, the city humming outside, and felt like I was part of something real, something bigger than my own head. Lena moved closer, taking a job in Erie to cut down on the drives. We found a place together, a small house near the lake with creaky floors and a backyard big enough for a garden. We moved in on a rainy day, our stuff piled in boxes, laughing as we tripped over each other. The wardrobe came with us, not because I needed it but because it felt right, like a piece of my story. We set it in the bedroom, its carved doors catching the light, and I didn't feel a twinge of fear. It was just wood, just home. My dad visited the new place, bringing a six-pack and a toolbox to help with a loose shelf. "Nice setup," he said, looking around, his eyes lingering on the wardrobe. I told him its story, not holding back, the shadow, the paralysis, the way it changed me. He listened, his hands still on the screwdriver. "You're tougher than I was," he said, and I saw something new in his face, respect, maybe, or recognition. We worked together, fixing the shelf, the sound of his hammer steady, like a heartbeat we shared. My mom planted roses in our backyard, her hands dirty, her smile bright. "This place needs life," she said, patting the soil. I helped, my knees in the dirt, the smell of earth grounding me. Lena joined us, her laughter mixing with my mom's, and I felt like I was part of something whole. We sat on the porch that night, eating empanadas, the lake's hum faint in the distance. "You found your place, Danny," my mom said, her voice soft. I nodded, looking at Lena, at the roses, at the life I was building. I kept sketching, kept writing, kept breathing. The nights were mine now, not the shadows. I'd wake sometimes, the clock at 3:17, but I'd lie there, the darkness soft, the silence a friend. I'd think about the lake, the way it moved without rushing, the way it held everything, light, dark, storm, calm. I'd close my eyes, Lena's breathing steady beside me, and know I was enough. Not because I'd beaten the shadow, but because I'd learned to live with it, to listen to it, to let it be. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full, like the lake at dawn, like the life I'd made, one breath at a time. Spring in Erie turned into summer, the lake shimmering under long golden days. The air carried the smell of warm sand and cut grass, and the city felt alive, like it was stretching after a long sleep. My new place with Lena became home in a way the apartment never was. The backyard bloomed with my mom's roses, their petals bright against the green, and we'd sit out there evenings, sipping iced tea, the hum of cicadas blending with the lake's distant rhythm. The wardrobe stood in our bedroom, its carved doors catching the sunlight, a quiet piece of my past that didn't weigh me down anymore. My art kept growing, spilling out of sketchbooks and onto canvases. The gallery in Pittsburgh asked for another show, this time with larger pieces, and I said yes without hesitating. I worked late into the night, the house quiet except for the scratch of my pencil or the soft clink of a paintbrush against a glass of water. I painted the lake at dusk, its edges blurred like my memories of the shadow. I painted Lena's profile, her eyes catching the light. I painted my parents' hands, clasped together in a moment I'd imagined but never seen. Each piece felt like a letter to myself, a way of saying I was still here, still creating. The online community grew, too. My blog became a space where people shared their own stories, not just about sleep paralysis but about fear, loss, hope. A teenager in Michigan wrote about waking up frozen, seeing a figure at their window, and how my sketches made them feel less scared. A woman in Texas said my words about breathing through fear helped her face her anxiety. I'd read their messages, the screen glowing in the dark, and reply with honesty, "I'm still figuring it out too, but you're not alone." It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about sharing the weight. Lena and I settled into our life together, finding a rhythm that felt natural. We'd cook dinner, arguing over spices, or walk to the lake, her hand in mine, the sand cool under our feet. One night, we lay on a blanket under the stars, the air warm, the waves a steady pulse. "You ever miss the shadow?" she asked, half joking, her voice soft. I laughed, turning to her. "Not really. But it taught me something." She raised an eyebrow. "What?" I thought for a moment, the stars bright above. "To listen. To myself, I mean. Even when it's hard." She nodded, her fingers tracing mine, and we lay there, the night wrapping around us like a promise. My dad started visiting more, sometimes staying for dinner. He'd bring a six-pack or a story from the road, his voice easier now, like he wasn't carrying as much. One evening, he sat in our backyard, a beer in hand, watching the roses sway in the breeze. "You built something good here, Danny," he said, his eyes on the flowers. I nodded, passing him a plate of grilled chicken Lena had made. "Trying to," I said. We talked about the past, not shying away from the rough parts, the fights, the years of silence. "I wasn't there when you needed me," he said, his voice low. "But I'm here now." I looked at him, seeing the lines in his face, the weight he carried, too. "That's enough," I said, and meant it. My mom became a regular at the house, her laughter filling the space. She'd bring cuttings from her garden or old recipes, teaching Lena how to make tostons while I watched, grinning. One afternoon, we sat on the porch, the air thick with summer heat, and she handed me a small box. Inside was a necklace, a thin silver chain with a cross, something my abuela had given her. "For strength," she said, her eyes soft. I put it on, the metal cool against my skin, and hugged her. "Thanks, Mom," I whispered. She smiled, her hand on my cheek. "You've always had it, Mijo." I kept meditating, making it part of my nights. I'd sit on the bedroom floor, the wardrobe in the corner, and breathe, letting the thoughts come and go. Sometimes I'd think about the shadow, how it felt like a part of me I'd had to face. It wasn't gone, not really, just quieter, like a friend who doesn't need to speak to be heard. I'd picture the lake, its waves steady, and feel the calm settle in, like the silence was a place I could rest. The gallery show was a whirlwind. The space was bigger this time, with tall windows and polished floors, and my paintings hung like windows into my world. People wandered through, their voices a soft hum, and I stood by Lena, her hand brushing mine. Jake was there, joking about how I'd gone fancy, and my parents came, standing together like they used to. My dad clapped me on the shoulder, his grip firm. "This is you, Danny," he said, and my mom nodded, her eyes wet. I looked at my work, the lake, the shadow, the hands, and felt like I'd said something true. The paralysis stayed away, a faint memory now. I'd wake some nights, the clock at 3:17, my heart a little fast, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, and let it pass. The wardrobe was just wood, its shelves empty, ready for whatever I chose to fill them with. I'd open the doors sometimes, not out of fear but habit, and smile at the emptiness. It was mine, like the silence, like the life I was building. My blog grew into something more, a small community of people sharing their shadows, their light. I started a newsletter, nothing formal, just stories and sketches, thoughts about fear and finding peace. People wrote back, their words raw and real, and I'd read them, the house quiet, Lena asleep beside me. One man wrote about losing his brother, how my sketches of the lake reminded him of their fishing trips. I replied, "Keep those memories close," and felt like I was holding space for him, the way others had for me. Lena and I talked about the future. Maybe a bigger house, maybe a trip to Puerto Rico to see where my mom grew up. We'd sit in the backyard, the roses blooming, and plan, our voices mixing with the lake's hum. "You're home now," she said one night, her head on my shoulder. I nodded, the stars bright above, and knew she was right. Not just the house, but me. I was home in myself, in the life I'd made. My dad sent me a drawing one day, a clumsy sketch of a truck he'd done on a napkin. "Thought you'd like it," he texted. I laughed, pinning it to the fridge. We met up more, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to fix something around the house. He'd tell me about his life, the road, the way he was learning to be alone without being lonely. "You taught me that," he said once, his voice quiet. I looked at him, surprised, and saw myself in his eyes, the part that kept going, no matter what. My mom and I planted more roses, the backyard a riot of color now. She'd tell stories of her childhood, of nights when she felt the bruja's touch, and how she learned to breathe through it. "You're stronger than you know," she said, her hands dirty with soil. I believed her now, not because I felt invincible, but because I'd faced the shadow and kept moving. The nights were mine, the silence a gift. I'd wake sometimes, the clock glowing 3:17, but I'd lie there, the darkness soft, Lena's breathing steady beside me. I'd think of the lake, its waves endless, carrying light and dark together. The wardrobe stood in its corner, a quiet witness to my journey. I didn't need to open it anymore. I knew what was inside: space, possibility, me. I'd close my eyes, the silence wrapping around me, and breathe, knowing I was enough, not because I'd won but because I was here, still sketching, still living, one quiet night at a time. Summer faded into fall, the lake turning a steely gray, the air crisp with the smell of leaves and distant bonfires. Erie settled into its quiet season, the streets lined with pumpkins and fading sunlight. Our little house felt like it had always been ours, the walls now covered with my sketches and Lena's books, the backyard a patchwork of roses and herbs we'd planted together. The wardrobe stood in the bedroom, its carved doors softened by the morning light, a relic of my past that blended into the present like an old friend who doesn't need to talk. My art became a rhythm, like breathing. I'd work on freelance projects during the day, logos, websites, the usual grind, but nights were for painting, for letting the colors spill out. I started using oils, their thick texture grounding me, each stroke a piece of something I couldn't name. I painted the wardrobe, not as a shadow's home but as a quiet sentinel, its would warm under imagined sunlight. I painted Lena, too, her face turned toward the lake, her scarf catching the wind. I posted them online, and the response was steady. Comments, shares, people saying my work felt like a window into their own quiet moments. The Pittsburgh Gallery became a regular spot. They asked for new pieces every few months, and I'd drive down with Lena, our car stuffed with canvases, her playlists filling the silence. At one show, a woman bought a painting of the lake, her eyes lingering on it like she saw something personal. "This reminds me of my dad," she said, her voice soft. "We used to fish together." I nodded, not knowing what to say but feeling the weight of her words. Lena squeezed my hand, her smile steady, and I realized my art wasn't just mine anymore. It was a bridge to others, a way to carry their stories, too. Lena and I grew closer, our lives tangled like the roots in our garden. We'd spend evenings cooking, her chopping vegetables while I stirred, the kitchen warm with the smell of garlic and cumin. One night, as we sat at the table, a candle flickering between us, she looked at me, her eyes serious. "You ever think about where this is going?" she asked. I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet. "I want it to keep going." She smiled, reaching for my hand. "Me too." It wasn't a proposal, not yet, but it was a promise, one we both felt. My dad started coming to Erie more, sometimes staying the weekend. He'd bring tools, insisting on fixing things, a creaky step, a loose cabinet door. "Gotta keep busy," he'd say, his hands steady with a screwdriver. We'd talk over beers in the backyard, the roses nodding in the breeze. One evening, He told me about his own dad, a man I barely remembered, who worked the docks in Buffalo and never talked about his feelings. "I got that from him," he said, his voice low. "Didn't know how to talk to you." I nodded, the air cool around us. "You're talking now," I said, and he smiled, a rare, real smile. My mom and I kept our rituals: dinners, gardening, flipping through old photos. One afternoon, she showed me a letter she'd written to my abuela, never sent, about moving to Erie, about loving my dad despite the fights. "I was scared too," she said, folding the paper carefully. "But you keep going." I hugged her, her perfume familiar, like a memory I could hold. I told her about Lena, about the gallery, about the nights I didn't fear anymore. "You found your light, Danny," she said, her eyes shining. I nodded, feeling it in my chest, warm and steady. Meditation became my anchor. I'd sit in the bedroom, the wardrobe in the corner, and breathe, letting the silence wrap around me. I'd think about the shadow, how it had been fear made visible, a part of me I'd needed to face. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was quiet, like a song you hum without thinking. I'd picture the lake, its waves endless, carrying everything: fear, hope, love. The silence wasn't empty. It was full, like the house, like my life. The blog grew into a small community, people sharing their stories in comments and emails. A man in Oregon wrote about his sleep paralysis, how he saw a figure at his door, how my words helped him breathe through it. A woman in Florida said my lake paintings reminded her of her childhood, of nights by the ocean. I'd read their words, the house dark except for the screen's glow, and reply, "You're not alone." It wasn't about fixing their pain, but holding space for it, the way I'd learned to hold mine. Lena and I planned a trip to Puerto Rico to see where my mom grew up. We booked tickets for the spring, imagining beaches and mountains, the air thick with salt and flowers. "You'll love it," my mom said, showing us photos of San Juan, her eyes bright. I sketched the trip before we even left: palm trees and colorful streets, my hand moving like it knew the place already. Lena watched, leaning over my shoulder. "You're gonna fill a whole book with this," she said, laughing. I grinned, kissing her, feeling like the world was wide open. My dad and I kept building, small steps that felt big. He came to the house one weekend, helping me build a trellis for the roses. We worked in silence mostly, the hammer's rhythm steady, but it wasn't heavy. "You're doing good, Danny," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Better than I ever did." I shook my head, handing him a water bottle. "We're both doing okay," I said, and he nodded, like he believed it. The gallery shows kept coming, each one a little bigger. I started teaching a workshop at the community center, showing kids how to draw their own stories. They'd sit around me, pencils flying, their faces bright with ideas. One girl drew a monster under her bed, her lines bold and fearless. "It's not scary if you draw it," she said, and I smiled, thinking of my own shadows. "You're right," I said, and meant it. The night stayed quiet, the wardrobe just wood, its shelves empty but not heavy. I'd wake some nights, the clock at 3:17, my heart a little fast, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, Lena's warmth beside me. The silence was mine now, a space where I could rest. I'd think of the lake, its waves carrying light and dark, and know I was enough. Not because I'd erased the shadow, but because I'd learned to live with it, to let it be part of my story. One I'd keep telling, one sketch, one breath at a time. Fall turned the lake into a mirror of rust and gold, the leaves drifting like confetti on the water's surface. Erie wrapped itself in fog some mornings, the city soft and muted, like a dream I could walk through. Our house felt rooted now, the backyard a tangle of roses and vines, the porch creaking under our steps. The wardrobe in the bedroom gathered dust on its top, its carved doors a familiar sight I barely noticed anymore. It was part of the landscape, like the lake, like the life Lena and I were building, one quiet day at a time. My art evolved, pulling in colors I hadn't used before: deep crimsons for the roses, cool blues for the lake at twilight. I'd set up a small studio in the spare room, the walls pinned with canvases, the air thick with the smell of paint and turpentine. I started a new series, calling it Echoes, sketches of shadows that weren't dark but layered, like memories overlapping. I'd post them online, and the feedback flowed, people saying the work felt like their own thoughts, visual and raw. One artist in New York messaged me, asking to collaborate. "Your style has soul," he wrote. I stared at the screen, Lena reading over my shoulder, her chin on my arm. "Say yes," she whispered, and I did, feeling the world expand just a little more. Lena's job in Erie became her own rhythm, a marketing gig at a local nonprofit that let her flex her creativity. She'd come home with stories of meetings and ideas, her eyes bright, her scarf tossed on the couch. We'd cook dinner together, experimenting with recipes from my mom, plantains fried crisp, rice simmered with spices. One night, as we sat at the table, the candlelight dancing on our faces, she looked at me seriously. "I love this," she said, her hand on mine. "Us. Here." I squeezed her fingers, the warmth spreading through me. "Me too," I said, and in that moment it felt like everything, the shadow, the paralysis, the fear, had led me here, to this table, to her. My dad's visits became regular, like a habit we both needed. He'd show up with a toolbox or a story from his latest route, his truck parked out front like a visitor from another life. One weekend, he helped me build a shelf in the studio, our hands working in sync, the hammer's rhythm filling the room. "You got a good thing going," he said, wiping dust from his hands. We sat in the backyard after, beers cold, the lake's hum faint. I told him about the collaboration, the new series, and he listened, his eyes steady. "You're making your mark," he said, and I heard pride in his voice, something new and real. My mom and Lena grew close, like family. They'd garden together, their laughter drifting in from the backyard, soil on their hands and smiles on their faces. One day, my mom brought over a box of old drawings I'd done as a kid, stick figures and superheroes, faded but full of energy. "Look at you," she said, spreading them on the table. Lena leaned in, grinning. "You were always an artist." I looked at the drawings, seeing the kid who hid in his room, sketching to escape. "Yeah," I said, my voice soft. "I guess I was." We hung a few on the fridge, their colors bright against the white, a reminder of where I started. I kept meditating, the practice woven into my days like breathing. I'd sit by the window, the lake visible in the distance, and let the thoughts flow, memories of the shadow, the weight on my chest, the whisper in the dark. It wasn't about forgetting but integrating, letting it be part of the whole. I'd picture the wardrobe, empty and open, and feel the calm settle, like the fog lifting over the lake. The silence was a companion now, not a threat, full of possibility. The collaboration with the New York artist took shape over emails and calls, our styles blending, my shadows with his urban edges. We planned a joint exhibit in Buffalo, a city that felt like a bridge between my dad's world and mine. I drove up for meetings, the road familiar, the lake on one side, fields on the other. The artist, a guy named Marco, was easy to work with, his ideas sparking mine. "Your work has depth," he said during a call, his voice crackling. "It's not just pretty, it tells something." I smiled, sketching as we talked, the pencil moving like it had a mind of its own. The blog became a book, or at least the start of one. I'd write late, the house dark except for my lamp, words flowing about the shadow, the lake, the nights that shaped me. Publishers reached out after seeing the online buzz, and I signed a deal for a graphic memoir, sketches and stories intertwined. Lena read the drafts, her feedback sharp but kind. "This is you," she said, kissing my forehead. "All of it." I nodded, the pages spread out, feeling like I was putting the pieces together, one word, one line at a time. My dad came to the joint exhibit, standing among the crowds, his hands in his pockets. He looked at my pieces, the shadows soft and layered, and nodded slowly. "This is something," he said, his voice quiet. I stood beside him, the gallery buzzing. "Thanks, Dad." He hugged me, awkward but real, and for a moment the distance between us felt gone. My mom was there, too, her arm linked with Lena's, their laughter cutting through the noise. Jake showed up, beer in hand, toasting like it was a party. "To Danny," he said, grinning. "The artist." The paralysis was a distant echo now, something I talked about in interviews or on the blog, not something that owned me. I'd wake some nights, the clock at 3:17, my heart steady, the room dark but not heavy. I'd breathe, slow and deep, Lena's arm over me, and let the silence hold me. The wardrobe was just a place for clothes now, its shelves filled with sweaters and shirts, no space for shadows. I'd open the doors in the morning, the light spilling in, and feel nothing but calm. Our trip to Puerto Rico was magic, the air thick with salt and flowers, the beaches white under the sun. We walked San Juan streets, my mom's stories coming alive in the colorful buildings and bustling markets. I sketched everything, the waves, the palms, the faces in the crowd, my book filling with new pages. Lena held my hand, her eyes wide. "This is incredible," she said, the ocean crashing behind us. I nodded, feeling the shadows lessen in every breath, to listen, to live, to let the light in. Back home, the house felt even more ours, the backyard blooming, the lake a constant companion. My dad called from the road, his voice lighter. "Saw your book in a store," he said, pride in his tone. My mom visited with cuttings, her garden extending into ours. Jake and I grabbed beers, his stories making me laugh. Lena and I planned more, maybe a ring, maybe a family, the future open like the lake's horizon. The nights were full of peace, the silence a gift I'd earned. I'd wake sometimes, the clock glowing, but I'd smile, the darkness soft, and breathe. The wardrobe stood quiet, a reminder of the journey. The shadow was part of me, not a fear but a teacher, whispering that I was enough. I'd close my eyes, the world steady around me, and know I was home, one breath, one sketch, one day at a time. Fall turned the lake into a mirror of rust and gold, the leaves drifting like confetti on the water's surface. Erie wrapped itself in fog some mornings, the city soft and muted, like a dream I could walk through. Our house felt rooted now, the backyard a tangle of roses and vines, the porch creaking under our steps. The wardrobe in the bedroom gathered dust on its top, its carved doors a familiar sight I barely noticed anymore. It was part of the landscape, like the lake, like the life Lena and I were building, one quiet day at a time. My art took on a life of its own. The Pittsburgh Gallery Show was a turning point, not because it made me famous, hardly, but because it showed me I could share without breaking. I kept posting online, my shadows and light series growing with new sketches, the silhouette of my mom's house, its porch sagging under years of memories, the diner's neon sign, flickering like a heartbeat, Lena's hands, curled around a coffee cup. The comments kept coming, from people in places I'd never been, Toledo, Boise, Raleigh, saying my work felt like their own thoughts, visual and raw. One guy wrote, "Your shadows are mine, too." I read it late one night, the apartment quiet, and felt a connection that was bigger than me. Lena was the first person I told. We were on a video call, her in her cozy Pittsburgh apartment, me in my cluttered living room. "Danny, that's huge," she said, her eyes lighting up. "You're doing it, aren't you?" "You have to." I laughed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. It's a lot." She leaned closer to the camera, her voice firm. "You're ready. I know you are." We talked logistics, frames, prints, how I'd get to Pittsburgh, but mostly we talked about what it meant. To put my work out there, to let people see the shadows I'd carried. It felt like opening the wardrobe all over again, but this time I wasn't afraid. My mom came over the next day, bringing a pot of sancocho that filled the apartment with the smell of cilantro and beef. We ate at the kitchen table, the radio playing low, some old merengue tune she hummed along to. I told her about the gallery, and her face broke into a smile that made her look younger. "Mijo, that's your dream," she said, her hand on mine. "You're not just drawing pictures. You're telling the world who you are." I nodded, my throat tight, and showed her the latest sketch, a silhouette of the wardrobe, soft light spilling around it. She traced the lines with her finger, like she could feel the weight of it. "This is you," she said. "All of it." I drove to Buffalo to see my dad, the road slick with ice, the heater in my car barely keeping up. We met at the same diner, the one with the sticky menus and the jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I told him about the gallery, expecting him to brush it off, but he leaned forward, his coffee mug cradled in his hands. "That's something, Danny," he said. "You're making your own way." He paused, his eyes on the table. "I never gave you enough credit for that." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, the silence between us softer now, like we were finally speaking the same language. The gallery prep took over my life. I spent nights framing prints, choosing which sketches to show, some from the Paralysis days, some from the lake, a few of my mom's hands or the city's quiet streets. Lena came to Erie to help, her energy cutting through my nerves. We worked in my living room, surrounded by paper and ink, laughing when we smudged a print or spilled coffee on a mat. "This is gonna be amazing," she said, taping a frame shut. I looked at her, her hair falling in her face, and felt something shift, like a door I hadn't realized was closed was creaking open. The show was on a Saturday, the Pittsburgh Gallery a small space with brick walls and warm lights. I stood by my sketches, my palms sweaty, as people wandered through, sipping wine and murmuring. Lena was there, wearing that green scarf, her smile steadying me. Jake showed up, looking awkward in a button-up shirt but grinning like he was proud. "This is cool, man," he said, staring at a sketch of the shadow. "Didn't know you had this in you." I smiled, feeling exposed but not afraid. My mom came, her eyes shining as she hugged me in front of a crowd. "This is you, Danny," she whispered. I saw my dad later, standing quietly by a sketch of the lake. "Good work," he said, his voice low but real. I nodded, the room buzzing with quiet voices, and felt like I'd carried something heavy across a finish line. The Paralysis was a distant echo now, something I talked about in interviews or on the blog, not something that owned me. I'd wake some nights, the clock glowing 3:17, my heart a little fast, but I'd breathe, slow and deep, and let it pass. The wardrobe was just a place for clothes now, its shelves filled with sweaters and shirts, no space for shadows. I'd open the doors in the morning, the light spilling in, and feel nothing but calm. After the show, I kept sketching, posting, connecting with people who saw themselves in my work. I started a newsletter, nothing formal, just stories and sketches, thoughts about fear and finding peace. People wrote back, their words raw and real, and I'd read them, the house quiet, Lena asleep beside me. One man wrote about losing his brother, how my sketches of the lake reminded him of their fishing trips. I replied, keep those memories close, and felt like I was holding space for him, the way others had for me. Lena moved closer, taking a job in Erie to cut down on the drives. We found a place together, a small house near the lake with creaky floors and a backyard big enough for a garden. We moved in on a rainy day, our stuff piled in boxes, laughing as we tripped over each other. The wardrobe came with us, not because I needed it but because it felt right, like a piece of my story. We set it in the bedroom, its carved doors catching the light, and I didn't feel a twinge of fear. It was just wood, just home. My dad visited the new place, bringing a six-pack and a toolbox to help with a loose shelf. Nice setup, he said, looking around, his eyes lingering on the wardrobe. I told him its story, not holding back, the shadow, the paralysis, the way it changed me. He listened, his hands still on the screwdriver. You're tougher than I was, he said, and I saw something new in his face, respect, maybe, or recognition. We worked together, fixing the shelf, the sound of his hammer steady, like a heartbeat we shared. My mom planted roses in our backyard, her hands dirty, her smile bright. "This place needs life," she said, patting the soil. I helped, my knees in the dirt, the smell of earth grounding me. Lena joined us, her laughter mixing with my mom's, and I felt like I was part of something whole. We sat on the porch that night, eating empanadas, the lake's hum faint in the distance. "You found your place, Danny," my mom said, her voice soft. I nodded, looking at Lena, at the roses, at the life I was building. I kept sketching, kept writing, kept breathing. The nights were mine now, not the shadows. I'd wake sometimes, heart racing, the clock at 3:17. But I don't fight it anymore. I just breathe, and wait for the silence to remind me that I'm still here. Fall deepened in Erie, the lake a slate gray under overcast skies, the air carrying the bite of coming winter. The city slowed, its streets lined with fallen leaves that crunched underfoot, the fog rolling in from the water like a soft blanket. Our house felt like a sanctuary, the backyard sleeping under a layer of mulch, the roses pruned and waiting for spring. The wardrobe in the bedroom was a constant, its carved doors gathering a fine dust that I'd wipe away absently, not out of fear but habit. It was part of us now, like the creaky stairs or the way the light slanted in through the windows in the afternoon. My art became a career, not just a passion. The collaborations multiplied. Marco in New York led to others, artists from Chicago, Seattle, even one in Toronto. We'd exchange ideas over video calls, our screens filled with sketches and concepts, my shadows blending with their colors and forms. At home, the studio overflowed with canvases, the smell of paint a constant companion. I started a new series, Whispers, delicate lines capturing the moment between sleep and wake, the shadow not as a threat but as a voice, soft and insistent. I posted them, and the feedback was immediate. People saying the work resonated, like it gave form to their own unspoken fears. The book took shape, pages filling with sketches and words, a graphic memoir that wove the shadow, the lake, my family into a tapestry. Publishers pushed for a release date, and I worked late, the house dark except for my lamp, Lena bringing me coffee with a kiss on the head. "You're creating something special," she said, reading over my shoulder. I nodded, the words flowing easier now, like the shadow had unlocked them. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It was for everyone who'd ever woken frozen, heart racing, knowing they weren't alone. Lena's presence was my anchor. We'd wander the lake paths on weekends, her hand in mine, the wind off the water carrying salt and chill. "Remember when you were scared of your own room?" she asked one day, her voice teasing but kind. I laughed, pulling her closer. "Yeah, but you helped pull me out." We planned more trips, New York for the holidays, Puerto Rico in spring, and the future felt open, like the lake's horizon, vast and full of promise. One evening, as we sat on the porch, the air crisp, she turned to me. "I want this forever," she said, her eyes meeting mine. I took her hand, the ring I'd bought hidden in my drawer, waiting for the right moment. "Me too," I said, and meant it with every breath. My dad's life intersected with ours more, his truck routes bringing him through Erie often. He'd stop by for dinner, his stories of the road filling the kitchen, Lena listening with genuine interest. One night, he stayed late, helping me hang a new shelf in the studio. "You've got a good setup," he said, his hands steady. We talked about his retirement plans, the way he was thinking about settling closer. "Maybe Buffalo's not forever," he said, his voice casual but meaningful. I nodded, handing him a beer. "You're always welcome here," I said, and saw the relief in his eyes, like a bridge we'd both been building was finally solid. My mom's garden extended into ours, her visits a blend of advice and stories. She'd arrive with cuttings or seeds, her hands quick in the soil, Lena kneeling beside her. "You two make a good team," she said one afternoon, wiping dirt from her brow. We'd sit inside after, tea steaming, and she'd share more about her life, the move from Puerto Rico, the early days with my dad, the fears she'd carried. "I breathed through them, like you did," she said, her voice soft. I hugged her, feeling the chain of her necklace against my chest, a reminder of the strength she'd passed on. Meditation was my daily ritual, a moment to sit with the silence, the lake visible through the window. I'd breathe, letting the memories flow, the paralysis, the shadow, the way it had forced me to listen. It wasn't about erasing the past, but embracing it, letting it shape me without defining me. I'd picture the wardrobe open, light spilling in, and feel the calm, like the fog lifting, revealing the world anew. The silence was a space for growth, full of potential. The book's release was a whirlwind, signings in Pittsburgh and Buffalo, the pages filled with my story. At one event, a reader approached, her eyes wide. "Your shadow is like mine," she said, holding the book like a talisman. I signed it, my hand steady, and told her, "Breathe through it. You're stronger than you know." Lena was there, her support quiet but constant, Jake clapping me on the back like I'd won the Super Bowl. My parents came to the Erie launch, standing together in the crowd, their pride a quiet force. The success brought opportunities. Interviews, workshops, even a TEDx talk in Cleveland. I stood on stage, the lights bright, sharing about the shadow, the paralysis, the way art saved me. The audience listened, their faces a sea of nods, and I felt connected, like my story was part of theirs. Back home, the house quiet, I'd sit with Lena, her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she said. I kissed her, feeling the ring in my pocket. We did. My dad retired that winter, moving to a small place near Erie, his truck sold, his days free. He'd come over often, helping with projects, a new fence, a garden bed, his hands finding purpose. "Didn't know retirement could be this good," he said one day, hammering nails. We'd talk about his past, the plant, the regrets, and I'd listen, the distance gone. "You turned out all right, Danny," he said, his voice gruff. I smiled, passing him a tool. "Thanks to you," I said, and saw the emotion in his eyes. My mom traveled to Puerto Rico with us, her first trip back in years. The beaches were white, the air thick with salt, the mountains green and alive. I sketched everything, the waves, the streets, my mom's face as she showed us her childhood home. Lena held my hand, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is where it started," my mom said, her voice soft by the ocean. I nodded, feeling the chain of generations, the strength passed down. The shadow felt far away, a story told and released. Back in Erie, the house filled with souvenirs and photos, the wardrobe holding our clothes from the trip. The nights were peaceful, the silence a friend. I'd wake sometimes, the clock at 3:17, but I'd breathe, the darkness soft, Lena beside me. The shadow was a memory, a teacher, whispering that fear was part of life, but not all of it. I'd close my eyes, the lake's rhythm in my mind, and know I was home, one breath at a time. The book sold well, leading to more, a sequel in sketches, a podcast with interviews about fear and art. I'd talk to guests, their stories echoing mine, the conversations deep and real. Lena co-hosted sometimes, her voice steady, her insights sharp. "You're helping people," she said after one episode. I nodded, the studio dark except for the recording light. "We are." My dad joined a gardening club with my mom, their lives intersecting in small ways, a shared dinner, a trip to the lake. "It's not too late," he said one day, his voice quiet. I nodded, seeing them together, the years softening the edges. The wardrobe stood, a quiet witness, its shelves full, its doors open to the light. The silence was mine, full of life. I'd breathe, the world steady, and know I was enough. Fall deepened in Erie, the lake a slate gray under overcast skies, the air carrying the bite of coming winter. The city slowed, its streets lined with fallen leaves that crunched underfoot, the fog rolling in from the water like a soft blanket. Our house felt like a sanctuary, the backyard sleeping under a layer of mulch, the roses pruned and waiting for spring. The wardrobe in the bedroom was a constant, its carved doors gathering a fine dust that I'd wipe away absently, not out of fear but habit. It was part of us now, like the creaky stairs or the way the light slanted in through the windows in the afternoon. My art became a career, not just a passion. The collaborations multiplied. Marco in New York led to others, artists from Chicago, Seattle, even one in Toronto. We'd exchange ideas over video calls, our screens filled with sketches and concepts, my shadows blending with their colors and forms. At home, the studio overflowed with canvases, the smell of paint a constant companion. I started a new series, Whispers, delicate lines capturing the moment between sleep and wake, the shadow not as a threat but as a voice, soft and insistent. I posted them, and the feedback was immediate. People saying the work resonated, like it gave form to their own unspoken fears. The book took shape, pages filling with sketches and words, a graphic memoir that wove the shadow, the lake, my family into a tapestry. Publishers pushed for a release date, and I worked late, the house dark except for my lamp, Lena bringing me coffee with a kiss on the head. "You're creating something special," she said, reading over my shoulder. I nodded, the words flowing easier now, like the shadow had unlocked them. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It was for everyone who'd ever woken frozen, heart racing, knowing they weren't alone. Lena's presence was my anchor. We'd wander the lake paths on weekends, her hand in mine, the wind off the water carrying salt and chill. "Remember when you were scared of your own room?" she asked one day, her voice teasing but kind. I laughed, pulling her closer. "Yeah, but you helped pull me out." We planned more trips, New York for the holidays, Puerto Rico in spring, and the future felt open, like the lake's horizon, vast and full of promise. One evening, as we sat on the porch, the air crisp, she turned to me. "I want this forever," she said, her eyes meeting mine. I took her hand, the ring I'd bought hidden in my drawer, waiting for the right moment. "Me too," I said, and meant it with every breath. My dad's life intersected with ours more, his truck routes bringing him through Erie often. He'd stop by for dinner, his stories of the road filling the kitchen, Lena listening with genuine interest. One night, he stayed late, helping me hang a new shelf in the studio. "You've got a good setup," he said, his hands steady. We talked about his retirement plans, the way he was thinking about settling closer. "Maybe Buffalo's not forever," he said, his voice casual but meaningful. I nodded, handing him a beer. "You're always welcome here," I said, and saw the relief in his eyes, like a bridge we'd both been building was finally solid. My mom and Lena grew close, like family. They'd garden together, their laughter drifting in from the backyard, soil on their hands and smiles on their faces. One day, my mom brought over a box of old drawings I'd done as a kid, stick figures and superheroes, faded but full of energy. "Look at you," she said, spreading them on the table. Lena leaned in, grinning. "You were always an artist." I looked at the drawings, seeing the kid who hid in his room, sketching to escape. "Yeah," I said, my throat tight. "I guess I was." We hung a few on the fridge, their colors bright against the white, a reminder of where I started. I kept meditating, the practice woven into my days like breathing. I'd sit by the window, the lake visible in the distance, and let the thoughts flow, memories of the shadow, the weight on my chest, the whisper in the dark. It wasn't about erasing the past, but embracing it, letting it shape me without defining me. I'd picture the wardrobe, empty and open, and feel the calm, like the fog lifting, revealing the world anew. The silence was a space for growth, full of potential. The collaboration with the New York artist took shape over emails and calls, our styles blending, my shadows with his urban edges. We planned a joint exhibit in Buffalo, a city that felt like a bridge between my dad's world and mine. I drove up for meetings, the road familiar, the lake on one side, fields on the other. At the artist, a guy named Marco, was easy to work with, his ideas sparking mine. "Your work has depth," he said during a call, his voice crackling. "It's not just pretty, it tells something." I smiled, sketching as we talked, the pencil moving like it had a mind of its own. The book's release was a whirlwind, signings in Pittsburgh and Buffalo, the pages filled with my story. At one event, a reader approached, her eyes wide. "Your shadow is like mine," she said, holding the book like a talisman. I signed it, my hand steady, and told her, "Breathe through it. You're stronger than you know." Lena was there, her support quiet but constant, Jake clapping me on the back like I'd won the Super Bowl. My parents came to the Erie launch, standing together in the crowd, their pride a quiet force. The success brought opportunities, interviews, workshops, even a TEDx talk in Cleveland. I stood on stage, the lights bright, sharing about the shadow, the paralysis, the way art saved me. The audience listened, their faces a sea of nods, and I felt connected, like my story was part of theirs. Back home, the house quiet, I'd sit with Lena, her head on my shoulder. "You did it," she said. I kissed her, feeling the ring in my pocket. We did. My dad retired that winter, moving to a small place near Erie, his truck sold, his days free. He'd come over often, helping with projects, a new fence, a garden bed, his hands finding purpose. "Didn't know retirement could be this good," he said one day, hammering nails. We'd talk about his past, the plant, the regrets, and I'd listen, the distance gone. "You turned out all right, Danny," he said, his voice gruff. I smiled, passing him a tool. "Thanks to you," I said, and saw the emotion in his eyes. My mom traveled to Puerto Rico with us, her first trip back in years. The beaches were white, the air thick with salt, the mountains green and alive. I sketched everything, the waves, the streets, my mom's face as she showed us her childhood home. Lena held my hand, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is where it started," my mom said, her voice soft by the ocean. I nodded, feeling the chain of generations, the strength passed down. The shadow felt far away, a story told and released. Back in Erie, the house filled with souvenirs and photos, the wardrobe holding our clothes from the trip. The nights were peaceful, the silence a friend. I'd wake some nights, heart racing, the clock at 3:17. But I don't fight it anymore. I just breathe, and wait for the silence to remind me that I'm still here. The book sold well, leading to more, a sequel in sketches, a podcast with interviews about fear and art. I'd talk to guests, their stories echoing mine, the conversations deep and real. Lena co-hosted sometimes, her voice steady, her insights sharp. "You're helping people," she said after one episode. I nodded, the studio dark except for the recording light. "We are." My dad joined a gardening club with my mom, their lives intersecting in small ways, a shared dinner, a trip to the lake. "It's not too late," he said one day, his voice quiet. I nodded, seeing them together, the years softening the edges. The wardrobe stood, a quiet witness, its shelves full, its doors open to the light. The silence was mine, full of life. I'd breathe, the world steady, and know I was enough. Winter came soft, the lake freezing, the city blanketed in snow. The house was warm, the backyard sleeping under white, the roses waiting. I sketched by the window, the light pale, Lena reading beside me. Life was a rhythm, steady and full. The shadow was a faint memory, its lesson etched in me. I'd wake at 3:17, breathe, and smile. The wardrobe was just wood, the silence a gift. I was home, one breath at a time.